Jesus elucidates the meaning of God's wrath. Chapter 141. The Wrath of God. Says Cyrenius, somewhat embarrassed, "Lord, no one except my humble self has asked you anything, and it seems as though you, as my God, Lord and maintainer, have come to hold a grudge against me as a result." Say I, the Lord, how can you so completely misunderstand the things I am saying? How can I hold a grudge against you when I continue to earnestly show you, as well as all other men, the truly essential things in life? Consider just how limited your judgment is, even now. When will it properly mature? How could the purest, primordial love of all loves within God ever hold a grudge? Whenever you read of the wrath of God, may you take those words to mean the eternally unchanging and firm severity of His will. And this resolute willpower within God is the innermost core of the purest and mightiest love, the source of infinity and all its works, the same way a baby chick hatches from an egg. So surely, this love could never hold a grudge against anyone in all eternity. Or does one of you believe that God could grow angry, as any foolish man would? Once more, the old senior chief 𝗺𝗲 steps towards me and says, "Lord, forgive me if I permit myself to comment on a point regarding the wrath of God. If a man, endowed with a firm belief in God, studies early world history, one cannot entirely deny that God has, at times, made those who had grown too unruly feel His wrath and vengeance in a particularly relentless and severe manner. Wrath and vengeance are mine, says the Lord through the mouth of the prophet. That this is truly the case is amply demonstrated by Adam's expulsion from paradise, by the great flood during the time of Noah, God's approval of Noah's curse on one of his own sons, as well as the later destruction of Sodom, Gomorrah, and the 10 cities situated at the spot we today call the Dead Sea. At an even later date, there were the plagues which befell the Egyptians and the Israelites in the desert, as well as the bloody wars ordained by God against the Philistines, the captives in Babylon, and finally, the total subjugation of the people of God by the might of the Gentiles. Lord, anyone who devotes just a little of his attention to this and considers God's behavior towards sinners, who are, after all, simply us humans, then he can only reach one conclusion: Jehovah harbors wrath and seeks to take absolute vengeance. It could certainly be said that this is simply how God raises His people, even entire nations, with His disciplinary rod in hand. Though these beatings and blows certainly do not appear to originate from the hand of a most loving Father. Rather, they seem to be inflicted by a terribly punctilious, if in a certain manner, most equitable judge, with the power over life and death, pestilence and fire. This is just my opinion, though its validity depends on whether or not world history does indeed tell us the truth. Should all the distressing stories of God's deeds be merely fictional, however, then this aspect we call the wrath and vengeance of God may indeed be the core of His everlasting and purest love. I only bring this up because you yourself, my Lord, have drawn attention to the topic of wrath and vengeance earlier on. It most likely is as you, my Lord, have described it to us earlier, though the matter remains curious. The fact that in times long past, when the wrath of God was announced, and the people did not better themselves and refused to repent for their sins, the most severe punishment was indeed carried out, both in large and small scales, as well as in general and specific instances. As we are already on topic, it would most surely be worth it for us to be enlightened in regard to this matter. For how indeed can these actions be reconciled with the purest love of God, supposedly devoid of both wrath and vengeance? Chapter 142. About the first human couple. Say I, my friend, the way you have spoken of God's wrath, vengeance, justice, and love mere moments ago, so too would an utterly blind man speak of the harmony and splendor of the colors of a rainbow. Have you truly not yet understood that all 5 books of Moses, as well as the scriptures of David and Solomon, can only be understood and grasped by way of their inner spiritual meaning? Do you honestly believe that God drove Adam out of paradise by employing an angel carrying a blazing sword in his right hand to ensure his expulsion? I tell you, even if it appeared as such to Adam, it was merely a comparative reflection of what took place within Adam himself. It was an important part of his upbringing, as well as a step towards the establishment of the first religion and the primordial church of mankind upon this earth. However, there never was a material paradise on this earth, where grilled fish would swim into people's mouths, for it was, as it still is today. The fish must first be caught, cooked, and only then eaten, though with moderation. If man was active, however, and harvested the fruits the earth offered him, and built up a reserve with them, then would every place man has cultivated have become a true paradise on earth. What would have become of the spiritual development of man if he had lived in a truly lethargic and gastronomic paradise, with no worries whatsoever, where the best fruits would veritably grow into his mouth as he lay upon the softest of lawns, merely having to wish for it, and all his desires would instantly be fulfilled, and he only would need to open his mouth for the tastiest morsels to drop into it? How would man ever attain the necessary independence in life if this were his upbringing? I tell you this, if paradise was as you believe it to be, mankind would, even until now, know not, and be nothing but a bunch of gluttonous oxen, or ravenous polyps at the bottom of the sea. So, what did the apparition of the angel with the blazing sword actually illustrate? What does this word-made image represent? Man was naked, for up until now has no man ever entered this world already clothed. Even if he, like this female donkey here, see volume 4, chapter 120, had not lived through a normal childhood in regards to the growth of the body, and was born already 12 feet tall, the approximate height of Eve herself, he nevertheless remained a child when it comes to the direct understanding of the natural constitution of this earth, and therefore he would have to mature and become knowledgeable by way of experience. During the warmer days of spring, summer, and fall, he could endure the weather comfortably with his naked skin. But during winter, he started to feel the cold. He wondered in his heart, and God began to awaken more and more within him, using both spiritual and physical influences. Where am I? What has happened to me? I felt so comfortable beforehand, but now I am freezing, and the chill winds gnaw at my skin. Evidently, he had to seek out shelter, protected from the winds, and he began to cover himself with all kinds of foliage from the trees. This compelled activity stimulated his thought processes, and they grew progressively more logical. However, he started to hunger as well, for many of the tree branches and bushes were now bare. He traveled far out into the countryside as he searched for food, and he found some trees that still offered plenty of fruits. He gathered and carried them to the cave he had chosen to be his home. His increasingly experienced mind spoke to him once again. The earth is cursed during this time, and you, as a mere man, may only gather food by the sweat of your brow. However, after the first man of this earth had managed to endure a winter in the cave on these heights forming the northeasterly border of the Promised Land, to which our Galilee belongs to, he and his wife were inspired to look deeper into their own minds and examine themselves more closely. He began to yearn for more company, and in a dream he was instructed on how to accomplish this. He proceeded to father Cain, and shortly thereafter Abel and Seth. Though it was his wife who initially gave him the incentive to procreate, for it was her who first received the vision on how to go about it. We shall not pursue this subject further, but I can tell you this, my friend 𝗲𝗲. Everything progressed normally, and nothing unnatural occurred. However, Moses nonetheless perceived that all that had happened only turned out the way it did because it was Jehovah's wish. God's Spirit revealed to him that the natural guidance along the path of experience was provided by none other than me, that is, my spirit. Because of this, Moses chose to illustrate God's constant presence right beside the first human couple, personalizing my influence by using focused, but nevertheless pertinent images, as was customary at the time, though essential as well, as these images offered necessary guidance to both this people and mankind at large. Needless to say, God and the angels knew fully well the importance of allowing the first human couple to live and develop in one of the most fertile places on earth. When later natural phenomena forced the first humans to leave their garden and search for supplies elsewhere on earth, this too did not occur because of any divine wrath. Love for mankind was the sole motivation, so that man would awaken from his increasingly lethargic sensuality and be stirred to action once again, in search of broader experiences. Once Adam, his wife, and his sons discovered that food could be found in nearly every corner of the earth, they began to set out on more extensive journeys, and in so doing became quite familiar with both Asia and Africa. This enriched them with a wealth of experience in all aspects of their lives. Clandestinely guided by the Spirit of God, they returned to their first Garden of Eden, and they remained there, and thus it became the point of origin for the whole world's population. Tell me from your heart, do you perceive any wrath or vengeance of God in all this? Chapter 143, The Great Flood. The Lord. Indeed, God in his wisdom may certainly grow reluctant if educated and at least partially matured people should wantonly and maliciously rebel against his order. However, this too is what the love of God is for in its infinite patience it knows how to find suitable ways of opposing mankind's twisted ambitions, as well as how to guide men back to the path of righteousness. In short, my final goal for mankind must be attained in such a way that there is no compulsion, no coercion. Man can and should not be compelled to do anything by any sort of divine, almighty revenge. Even these measures should not be regarded as a consequence of divine wrath, for they are merely the result of man's perverse behavior. Yes, both the world and nature thereupon have received necessary and immutable laws from God. However, man too has been given such laws, which govern his behavior and his physical presence. Whenever man attempts to rebel against this order and seeks to twist the world in his image, it is not the spontaneous wrath of God that punishes him, but the grounded divine laws within everything created, affronted by man's failure to consider them. You now ask yourself whether or not the Great Flood is to be regarded as a natural and necessary consequence of man's twisted behavior as well, and I tell you that it should. I had instructed more than 100 prophets and emissaries to warn the people against acting contrary to the natural and divine laws. For more than 100 years, I earnestly pointed out to them the terrible corporeal and spiritual consequences of their perverse behavior. However, their wicked wantonness went so far that, in their blindness, they not only mocked the messengers, but even killed many of them. Therewith, they formally declared war on me. Even in spite of this, however, I did not grow angry or vengeful, and instead, I merely permitted them to continue on their chosen course of action. They had to make the woeful experience of realizing that their unreasonableness and ignorance, both in themselves responsible for what they are, can never, in no shape or form, oppose the greatness of nature and God's order, or, in their blindness, do with it as they please. Lo, you are free to climb the rock south of here, roughly the height of 500 men, and then willfully throw yourself headfirst over the edge. In accordance with the essential laws of gravity, this impetuous act will most certainly cost you the life of your body. Ask yourself whether or not that fate would befall you as a consequence of my wrath and vengeance. Over there, eastward, you behold a tall and densely forested mountain range. Take an army with the strength of 1,000,000 men and set fire to the woods, and shortly will the mountains be utterly bare. What consequences will this act bring about? The many nature spirits, now stripped naked and deprived of their activity, will rage and clamor throughout the open air. Innumerable flashes of lightning, violent cloudbursts, and incessant hailstorms will ravage the land far and wide. All this is a natural consequence of deforestation. Tell me of any evidence pointing towards the wrath and vengeance of God. Millions of men zealously endeavor to level mountains, to drain great lakes and fill them with earth, to construct broad highways and facilitate warfare, to clear the slopes of whole mountain ranges, up to 700 to 900 meters, to dig 400 to 500 meter deep moats around the base of mountains, thereby tapping into the Earth's hidden reservoirs, so that the mountains subside into the vast cavities beneath, now drained, and the water begins to rise, so that, in Asia, it rages like the sea, nearly engulfing the highest summits. Add to this the fact that, along with the mountains, many 100,000 acres of healthy forest land are destroyed, releasing myriads of earth and nature spirits, formerly occupied with caring for the beautiful, lush vegetation, but now are suddenly free, with no tasks to perform. Ask yourself what an uproar would erupt among the spirits in the skies above. What storms and enormous cloudbursts, what hailstorms and innumerable lightning strikes would be hurled down from the heavens onto the earth below, for more than 40 days, and what enormous quantities of water would flood nearly the entirety of Asia. All this because of natural causes. Again, I ask, was this too the work of God's wrath and implacable vengeance? Moses detailed this event, as he did everything else, in the manner then commonly used, that is, by way of images. While choosing these, he was inspired by the Holy Spirit and always allowed my divine foresight to prevail. But this can only be done by drawing genuine and true comparisons. Is the Lord Almighty therefore a God of wrath and vengeance, simply because you, and many others, have never truly understood His innumerable great revelations? Chapter 144. The Causes of Catastrophes. The Lord. I tell you this, to live merely 50 years in the righteous order of God, and never again will you see, hear, or taste any calamity. Lo, calamities, epidemics, all manner of disease among both humans and animals, bad weather, lean and fruitless years, devastating hailstorms, widespread destructive floods, hurricanes, great storms, plagues of locusts, and the like. All of these things are merely consequences of man's twisted behavior. If man were to live within God's given order as much as possible, then he would have no reason to expect any of these disasters. The years would pass by like pearls on a string, each as blessed as the last. The habitable regions of Earth would never again be afflicted by chilling winds or heat waves. However, the clever and exceedingly shrewd men undertake projects far in excess of their needs. For instance, erecting buildings that are far too large, carrying out unwarranted improvements, leveling entire mountains to construct highways and wage more war, destroying hundreds of thousands of acres of the most lush forest land, digging far too deep into the mountains to mine gold and silver, and lastly, living in continual dispute and discord with one another. All the while, they are constantly surrounded by hordes of intelligent nature spirits, secretly responsible for all manner of weather on this earth, as well as for the purity and health of the air, water, and soil. Is it then any wonder that this earth is increasingly afflicted by an unfathomable amount of evils of every type and description? Miserly and avaricious men fit locks to their barns and keep armed guards to watch over their surfeit of treasures and possessions. Woe to those who might approach without authorization, for they would certainly be instantly and severely punished. With this, I do not mean to imply that one should not be permitted to protect his hard-earned possessions. In this case, I speak of an unnecessary or truly excessive surplus. Would it not be preferable to build barns that are open to all the poor and weak, though of course supervised by their wise benefactors, as to prevent anyone from taking more than he requires? If thereby all greed and avarice were to disappear from the earth, listen well to what I am saying, then all the lean years would likewise vanish from this world. You ask how this could be possible. My answer is, in the most natural way in the world. Meaning, anyone who is even the least bit familiar with the inner workings of the kingdom of nature will not only realize this shortly, but veritably grasp it as well, with both hands and feet. Before us, we have the healing plant, and over there, the most harmful poison plant. Do not both of them obtain their nourishment from the same water, the same air, the same light, and the warmth thereof? And yet, one plant possesses healing properties, while the other is full of deadly poison. Why is that so? Because the healing plant, with its well-ordered inner nature, influences all the nature spirits surrounding it in such a way that they, in peace and harmony, nourish it and conform to its character, both within and without. This way does the plant develop its healing properties, and in the sunlight of the day will the vapors it emits, together with the surrounding nature spirits, exert a most beneficial and medicative influence on both humans and animals alike. However, the poison plant, whose character is of a selfish and wrathful sort, contaminates the surrounding nature spirits with the same traits, becoming utterly twisted. They then too conform to the plant and nourish it, their innermost nature growing identical to the plant's original character. The vapors it emits, as well as the surrounding environment, are poisonous and harmful to humans, while animals, with their acute sense of smell, will keep their distance. Chapter 145. The Influence of Evil on Good. The Lord. Though an even greater and far-reaching poison plant is man himself, that is, one of an exceedingly greedy and avaricious sort, all the nature spirits surrounding him far out into the land, the vapors his body emits, as well as his entire external sphere of influence, will conform to his inner nature. The thereby corrupted nature spirits will seek to convert the still untainted spirits venturing into their vicinity to their evil ways. And since these nature spirits are embroiled in constant conflict with not only man, but so too with animals, plants, water and air, they inevitably induce many an occasion for friction, dispute and unnecessary movement throughout the elements. Anyone who wishes to see this in practice should visit a good-natured person. All the animals around them will assume a much more gentle character. Dogs are the best example of this, as within a short while they will fully adopt the nature of their master. A dog owned by a miser will certainly be avaricious as well, and when it is feeding, one should refrain from approaching it. But go visit a generous and gentle person, and you will notice, if they keep a dog, that it will be of good nature and prefer to abandon any claim to the food bowl, rather than involve itself in a vicious battle with an uninvited guest. All other pets as well belonging to a gentle and kind-hearted owner will be significantly more docile, and indeed, even in the plants and trees he owns, will other people with acute senses perceive a significant difference. On the other hand, let us consider the servants of a miser and see whether or not they too become greedy, jealous and avaricious, and for that matter, insidious, insincere and deceitful. Even an otherwise good and generous person, should they spend too much time in the company of a miser, up to his ears in gold and silver, will eventually grow rather parsimonious and apprehensive towards performing charitable deeds. Add to this the fact that, on this earth, the effort required for evil to transform something good into something bad is much less significant than the other way around. Consider a truly indignant man who would like to destroy everything around him out of sheer fury and wrath. Thousands of good-natured onlookers would inevitably become enraged themselves, wishing to get a hold of the irate man and expel the anger from him, if only all their sharp, clutching fingers could have space on his skin. Why does a single wrathful individual incite thousands others to do the same in return? And how are the thousands of well-disposed people unable to influence the one exception? All of this is due to the fact that, especially on this earth, for the sake of the upbringing of the children of God, the temptation to succumb to evil and wickedness is much greater than vice versa. And this must always be the case. The reason for this I have explained to you already, so I have no need to repeat myself. Once again, behold these two plants, and imagine a large bronze cauldron in which we will intend to brew a medicinal tea, using thousands of the healing plants. Those suffering from chest pain who drink from it would soon begin to feel the beneficial effects, for the good nature spirits will quickly put the few evil ones within their bodies to rights. However, if we take this one particular poison plant and throw it into the cauldron where the 1,000 healing plants are already brewing, the single poison plant would transform the entire medicinal infusion into a deadly toxin. Woe to the ill one who dares to take a sip of this tea. The truth is, it would most certainly cost him his life, and he would be beyond help in terms of natural remedies. Consider the opposite case as well. If we brew 1,000 of the poison plants in the same cauldron to produce a deadly tea, and finally add just one of the healing plants to the concoction, how quickly will the few medicinal nature spirits assume the lethal toxicity of the poison brew? We can conclude with absolute certainty that on this earth, For the reasons given, evil is much more likely to conform good to its own wicked nature than the other way around. Now imagine a whole slew of wicked people in an area, or even in an entire country, and ask yourself, bearing in mind what you have already heard, if it seriously depends on God's wrath, if all kinds of evil influences are at work. I tell all of you, though especially you, my friend 𝗲, that all of this solely depends on man himself, his behavior and way of life. Never has the wrath and vengeance of God anything to do with it, except for the fact that I have ordained the nature of things as they are, and this order must, of course, be upheld and remain unaltered for as long as this earth exists. Otherwise, will this world dissipate, unable to provide a place for man to dwell during his trial life. The solution, therefore, is to embrace all the good things in life with earnest intent and all the power and strength one can muster, if one wishes not to be swallowed by all the wickedness surrounding him. So, seek to perfect your inner life by the faithful obeisance to my doctrine, for thereby will the poisons of this world never again be able to harm you.